Hello and welcome to Unacademy. In this video, we are here to discuss a disturbing development in the ongoing investigation of the tragic crash of Air India Flight 171. Over the past few days, we have been seeing deliberate attempts by Western media, particularly American media, to try and change the narrative during the course of the investigation prematurely without any evidence. Attempts being made to malign the Indian pilots, try and shift the blame onto the Indian pilots without adequate proof or evidence. This raises a disturbing question. Is there a larger conspiracy afoot by Boeing, the American aerospace major? Is there a collusion between Boeing and Western media to misdirect the investigation and shape the narrative in order to deflect any blame or any possible fault in their own design or in the manufacturing of the aircraft itself? Now, this has serious implications for not just India's sovereignty, but as well as for the victims' families, which deserve the truth and justice. So, let's break down this important development. But before that, I have an announcement for those who are preparing for 2026 and beyond. If you're preparing for the civil services exam and planning to give the attempt in 2026, 2027, and beyond, you have a golden opportunity to enroll for Unacademy's online classroom program. The courses are available at just 17,999, and this course will give you access to all our live and recorded lectures by India's top English medium educators. You'll also get access to the study material, the test series, mentorship, and doubt resolution sessions. And you stand to get up to 12 months free extension if you avail this offer, which is ending today. So today is the end date of the offer, as we have been informed by an academy. And on the subscription page, you might see a different price. So to avail the discount on the offer, please enter the code IAS English. And those interested can click on the link provided in the video description. And if you want the PDF of the session, please scan the QR code on your screen and join my Telegram channel. After the session, I'll be uploading the PDF over here. Now let's come back and focus on the topic at hand. On 12th of June, the whole country went into mourning following the tragic crash of Air India Flight 171. Just moments after takeoff, the plane crashed into a medical college campus, and a total of 260 fatalities were recorded. Almost all the passengers and crew members were killed except for one miraculous survivor. 19 people on the ground at the crash site were also killed. So, this was one of India's most tragic air accidents, and the flight was a Boeing 787 Dreamliner. Now, following any such air crash or any accident involving an aircraft, an investigation is taken up by the concerned authorities. The concerned authorities under whose jurisdiction the case comes, they take up a thorough, holistic, professional investigation to break down the sequence of events and the possible failures that might have happened, which could have led to the crash. See, please understand, modern aircrafts are very, very complex systems. Any number of factors and reasons could be responsible for a certain air crash. And it takes a lot of time to carefully uncover these details and events and to establish with proof and evidence as to what exactly caused the crash. There could be human error on the part of the pilots. There could be a mechanical failure as a result of poor maintenance and negligence by the flight operator. Or there could be a fault in the very design and the manufacturing of the aircraft. There could be environmental conditions playing a role as well. Usually, it's not one factor alone that contributes to an air crash. Usually, it is a series of glitches that add up and pile up eventually, contributing to the accident. That's why air crash investigations are a very complex process, time consuming process, and it should be handled professionally in a transparent manner to ensure that we bring out the truth, to not only provide closure to the victims' families, but more importantly, to ensure that such tragedies do not recur. In fact, the purpose of an air crash investigation is not to assign blame, It's not to play the blame game and blame the manufacturer of the plane or the operator of the plane or the pilots. Instead, the purpose of any air crash investigation is to identify what went wrong, how it could have been averted, and learn those lessons so we prevent future tragedies from occurring. In fact, this is codified into international law under the International Civil Aviation Organization, which was established through the Chicago Convention. The Chicago Convention of 1944 on International Civil Aviation provided for the establishment of this global body that regulates the civil aviation industry. It mandates the standards and protocols and procedures to be followed during an air crash investigation. And the Chicago Convention is very, very clear on this point that the true purpose and intent of any honest investigation into an air crash is not to assign blame, not to hold just someone accountable, but more importantly, to learn lessons and prevent and avert future tragedies. So, when it comes to India, these air crash investigations are handled by the AAIB, Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau, which was established in 2012 as an attached office under the Ministry of Civil Aviation. This organ of the Indian government functions in accordance with the Chicago Convention, the provisions of the Convention on International Civil Aviation, and abides by the guidelines and standards and protocols laid down by the International Civil Aviation Organization. So, as per these established standards, within 30 days of the crash, first a preliminary report has to be submitted. It's a mandatory obligation. Then, within 12 months of the accident, the full and final report has to be submitted. So, as I said, modern aircrafts are very complex systems. Any number of factors or reasons could be responsible for a crash. So, to understand what exactly happened, it requires time and careful investigation and honest professional investigation. That is why these time periods are prescribed and strict deadlines are also placed by the International Civil Aviation Organization. And as I told you, the purpose of such investigation is not to appropriate blame or just throw liability and hold someone accountable. More importantly, it's about understanding what went wrong and how we can prevent things from going wrong again in the future. It's about preventing such accident from occurring again. In fact, as per the norms of International Civil Aviation Organization, the investigating authority should include all the stakeholders as part of the investigation process. The investigation would not only contain experts and professionals. For example, if you have to analyze the black box, which consists of the flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder, you need specialists who are experts in forensics. You would also need former pilots with incredible experience to provide their inputs and suggestions. You would need engineers who have expertise on working on such aircraft. You would also need psychologists who are included to assess the state of mind of the pilots, because you can't rule out any angle till it is established with proof and evidence. And even citizens of foreign countries, if they have lost their lives in the crash, those foreign governments would also be included. So, in the current AI 171 crash, the governments of Portugal, then United States, and others are part of the investigation. For example, the Federal Aviation Administration of the US has been asked to collaborate with the investigation. The flight manufacturer, Boeing, the flight operator, Air India, will also be part of the investigation. They will have representatives, and the whole team would be led by the AAIB. So these are the global standards maintained, and you need to share the reports as well with the concerned stakeholders, including with the International Civil Aviation Organization. So, when such standards and protocols are clearly established, what has happened in the last few days is honestly extremely disturbing. So, as per the mandated deadline, within the 30-day period, the AAIB submitted a preliminary report and it provided a shocking revelation. It has clearly pinpointed the most proximate plausible cause, which is the fuel switches being transitioned from the run position to cutoff position within 1 second of each other. So what does this mean? What are these fuel switches? Now, in the cockpit, you can see in the image as well, this is the thruster module, which the pilots who are sitting on either sides, the captain and the co-pilot, use to essentially take off and control the thrust of the engines. So on the thruster module itself, you will find these fuel switches, right, which essentially controls the supply of the fuel to the engine. So there are two such fuel switches when there are two engines, one for each engine. And these are not ordinary switches. It's not a switch which you can accidentally turn on or turn off. It is having a spring loaded mechanism wherein you have to pull the switch out first and then transition it from run to cutoff or cutoff to run position. And for every change, there has to be a deliberate intent. Accidentally, it can't be flipped just by an accidental motion of your hand, right? These fuel switches will not change their position. They've been designed in such a foolproof manner. You have to deliberately do it. So if the report says there was a transition of the switch from run to cutoff position, now it needs to be established whether the switch manually, physically moved on the thruster module, or was it incorrectly recorded on the black box, on the flight data recorder. Or maybe the switch remained in the same position physically, but did electrical signals or a software glitch contribute to the fuel switch being turned off by the control system, thus cutting off the fuel supply to the plane? So these are key questions to be answered, and the fuel switches manufactured by Honeywell has come into question. These are the switches which are on board the Boeing 787 Dreamliner. Now, this finding of the report based on the flight data recorder, it is consistent with the visuals that we saw on the day of the crash. The flight lost its altitude very quickly, descended and crashed immediately after takeoff. We even saw the RAT being deployed, the ram air turbine, which gets deployed automatically only in case of both engines failing. So the visual evidence is consistent with what has been brought out in the preliminary report. There was clearly a loss of fuel, a loss of engine thrust, and the flight data recorder records, and it is noted in the preliminary report as well, that the pilots made a last minute attempt to restart both the engines. They brought back the switches to the run position, and engine 1 managed to ignite. But there wasn't enough time for the ignition of engine 2, and by then the altitude was being lost. It wasn't at a significant height, and very quickly the plane descended and crashed very violently. But in the preliminary report, there was something else which was quite shocking and quite alarming as well. The AAIB has provided only a small excerpt of what the pilots were talking about in the last moments. There's only one conversation which is reported by the AAIB, which has raised more questions, more doubts, and more concerns than answers. The report says that one of the pilots, it doesn't identify which pilot, that one of the pilots asked, "Why did you cut off the fuel?" And the other pilot replies, "I didn't do it." Now, when you add only this conversation in the preliminary report, without the context, without the background, what the pilots had discussed before this or after this gives scope for wide interpretation. Any number of possibilities will come up, and obviously, with such a conversation being put out in the public domain without much thought, the AAIB was essentially casting aspersions or possibly, showing a sort of a bias towards a pilot error. Please understand, both pilots were experienced. Captain Sumit Sabharwal had 15,000 hours of flying experience with 8,500 hours on Boeing 787, flying the same aircraft. First officer Clive Kunder had 3,500 hours of flying experience. So these reportings by the AAIB raised a lot of questions. It invited a lot of criticism as well, because the report doesn't mention who said what. And pointing fingers just at the conversation based on this without any context was largely seen as misleading. And it led to questions being raised about the progress and the path in which the investigation was progressing. Without giving priority to other possibilities, it appears that preliminary report is more heavily focused on the pilot conversation and the position of the fuel switch without considering the alternate possibilities which might have happened. Now, this flaw in the preliminary report, this limited conversation which was reported, this was enough for Western media to run with their own narrative and carry out highly irresponsible reporting. Just a couple of days ago, the Wall Street Journal, which is a so called reputed media organization, ran a detailed article citing American officials familiar with cockpit voice recordings, and they clearly shifted the blame to the senior pilot, to Captain Sumit Sabharwal. Look at the headline: New details in Air India crash probe shifts focus to senior pilot. And how did they arrive at this conclusion? The conclusion has been arrived at based on this two-line conversation where it is Sumit Sabharwal who replies. It was Clive Kunder who asked the first question. And Clive Kunder, the co pilot who was commanding the plane at that time, piloting the plane during takeoff, is in panic. His voice appears to be in panic. He's asking, why did you cut off the fuel supply? So, this psycho assessment has been used by Wall Street Journal to assume that Clive Kunder is largely innocent, had no idea what was happening. That's why the sense of panic in his voice. Whereas the captain was very calm, composed, and he said, I didn't do it. Now, this is pure conjecture. There is no proof. Yes, psychometric assessment plays a big role in any investigation of accidents. There is a possibility of a pilot's suicide, pilots who are under severe mental stress. Such incidents have been seen in the past. But based on this limited conversation alone, without verifying other facts and without substantial proof, casting these aspersions in the public is nothing short of irresponsible reporting. If it is just irresponsible reporting, even that is fine. But the question which comes up is there a bigger conspiracy? Is Boeing colluding with American media, Western media, to push this narrative at a preliminary stage itself, to shift the global focus and attention because the whole world is keeping its eyes on this investigation? The Boeing 787 Dreamliner is considered as one of the base fleets of most airlines around the world, with hundreds and hundreds of them in operation. So, this could have serious business consequences for Boeing. See, until last week, there were a lot of rumors floating around that companies like Boeing, they try to manipulate such investigation. They'll never allow blame to be appropriated to them. But based on the reporting of Wall Street Journal, which has now been amplified by other American and Western media outlets, it leads us to question and raise this possibility of a conspiracy. Though we never acknowledge such rumors unless there is something substantial, what's happening, the sequence of events, possibly points towards a bigger collusion to try and cover up, to try and mislead and misdirect the investigation even before the truth and facts can be established. Be it Reuters, ABC News, and many other American and Western media outlets have picked up this article from Wall Street Journal and they're pushing this narrative again and again. See, it's the same Western media which doesn't pay attention to any of India's achievements or doesn't focus on issues related to India. For example, after Pahalgam attack, there was hardly any focus on the Indian narrative. But now, when it suits their agenda and propaganda, the entire focus is on the crash investigation with multiple articles in Western media. And now we are seeing clear attempts in the last 2 days to try and misdirect the investigation. So, whether it is just irresponsible reporting or a deliberate collusion and a bigger conspiracy, either ways, it is extremely risky, dangerous, not just for India, but for the entire world, for the world of civil aviation. So, AAIB came out with a very strong criticism after this report. It condemned the selective, unverified reporting and blasted Wall Street Journal. The pilots' union and associations have raised their arms, and correctly, they have issued a legal notice as well to Wall Street Journal and Reuters. Because experts are pointing out there are many, many possibilities which are yet to be considered. We need to still shed light. The investigators have to look into various other angles. There is a possibility of a software glitch where the flight control system, which is largely automated today, could go wrong. There could be glitches, and we have seen such incidents in the past. And I would like to bring that up as well. There could be an electrical sensor failure with wrong readings and wrong signals, leading to a malfunction of critical equipment that might have played a role in the transition of the fuel switch from the run to cutoff position. These possibilities are still being investigated, and without any proof and evidence, to make these baseless claims is nothing short of irresponsible reporting by Western media outlets. And the blame should be placed on AAIB as well for bringing out such a shoddy preliminary report. Now, why would you give out only a part of the conversation, which could give rise to speculation? If at all, the AAIB wanted to be more transparent, they should have published the entire cockpit voice recording so that the whole context would be available, right? We would know what was discussed before, what was discussed later. So, this ambiguity in language, the lack of clarity in the sequencing, and there is no context which is there in the given in the preliminary report. This is again pointing towards either incompetence on the part of AAIB or even possible collusion as well. Because this report is what has now created an opportunity for the Western media to try and shift the narrative. Now, let us look at other concerns which are already present, which are being addressed by the investigators now. Back in 2018, the US regulator, the FAA, had issued an advisory pointing towards potentially high failure rate of these fuel switches manufactured by Honeywell. This was in the context of Boeing 737 jets, but the same fuel switches, the exact same model of Honeywell fuel switches, are used on the Boeing 7878 Dreamliner as well. Now, following this advisory, ideally, the airlines operating the flights, the regulators in other countries should have ordered a thorough review and inspection. But Air India, being Air India, did not conduct any further inspection of the fuel switches, despite an advisory being issued. Air India's justification is that it was a mere advisory, not a mandatory directive. The DGCA, Director General of Civil Aviation, had certified the plane as worthy of flying. It had issued an airworthiness certificate. Air India has also certified that there was no mechanical fault with the plane. But yes, all these possibilities will have to be considered. As I said, the failure could have happened anywhere. It could be maybe one issue or a series of issues which could have contributed. On this very plane, the AI 171, which crashed, the thruster module had been replaced twice during regular maintenance in 2019 2023. So, investigators will be looking at this angle as well. And let me tell you something even more disturbing. 6 years ago, there was an incident in Japan where the fuel switch on a Boeing 787 automatically transitioned from run to cutoff position mid flight, and the pilots hadn't even touched the switches. So, how did this happen? This was a result of a software glitch on the onboard flight control system, a computerized system, which misread the sensor signals and data and assumed that the plane is on the ground. And it automatically turned off the fuel supply to the engines by transitioning the fuel switch from run to cutoff position. Fortunately, the plane was mid flight, flying at a cruising altitude. The pilots managed to easily turn it back. They brought back the fuel supply and reignited the engines. AI 171 was not so lucky because this happened right after takeoff. It hadn't attained enough altitude. So there was no time to reignite the engines, though one engine reignited, the other did not. And there wasn't enough thrust to sustain the flight. So there has been one such recorded incident where a 787 has recorded an automatic transition where the onboard computers, the software had a flaw and it made a transition from run to cutoff where the pilots had not even touched the fuel switches. This is where the question comes up. Are attempts being made? Is there a Western conspiracy to sabotage the investigation itself? Let me know what you think in the comment section. Because this is something that not only in a way threatens to derail our sovereignty, our investigation, but this is gross disservice to the victims' families and the victims themselves. They deserve the truth, they deserve the honest answer. As I said, investigation is not about appropriating blame or liability, it's about finding out what went wrong and preventing future tragedies. In fact, one of India's well known aviation expert has correctly pointed out, how does Wall Street Journal know much more than what Indian public and Indian media are aware of? This is likely because we have made FAA and Boeing a part of the investigation. The AAIB relied on them to download the data from the cockpit voice recorder and flight data recorder. We have shared all the evidence with them. They have access to it. So The American journalists who have written this article obviously are basing their arguments on the sources, American officials who are, having access to the cockpit voice recordings, and they're adding their own twist, their own interpretation, that co-pilot was panicking when he asked, why did you cut off the fuel supply? Whereas the captain was very cool and composed and he said, I did not. That alone is being used as a basis to, shift the blame towards the captain. And this is nothing but irresponsible, right? And even worse, this could be a possible collusion, a conspiracy, because Boeing has a history of doing this. The MAX 737 has suffered several such cases where the planes had crashed. Boeing knew about what was going wrong, and yet it subverted the information, kept the information hidden. It misled the regulators as well, the authorities, and it was even charged on the account of fraud. It was charged with a criminal conspiracy as well. The Boeing MAX 737 was launched by Boeing a decade ago as a flagship flight with the most modern advanced technology. It even had a completely automated onboard computer control system. One of the 73 MAX planes crashed in the Java Sea in Indonesia, killing 100 plus people. Following the investigation, the investigators, when they were still struggling for answers, Boeing had already figured out what might have gone wrong. The reports indicated, preliminary reports, that the plane's nose was constantly diving down automatically, though the pilots were trying to pull it back up. And despite the best attempts, the plane kept on diving. And this was all because of a glitch in the software on the automated onboard computer system. So when Boeing realized the error, the mistake, instead of warning the world and grounding all the planes, they tried to hide this information. They kept it away from the regulators and investigators. And this led to another crash of a plane in Ethiopia, where again 100 plus people were killed. Totally 346 deaths in just 7 years. Two major plane crashes because of a software glitch, which obviously was the responsibility was on Boeing. So when this was uncovered, there was a huge outrage and outcry against Boeing and its culture, safety culture. There were reports that the then Boeing CEO had tried to pressurize the FAA to lift the grounding order of the plane, because around the world, MAX 377s were grounded after the Ethiopian crash. And the Boeing CEO was alleged to be putting pressure on the regulator to lift the grounding order to keep the planes flying despite the known risk. Several former Boeing employees who have given interviews to various investigators and documentaries, they have said that safety culture is falling short in Boeing. They themselves would never fly a Boeing plane. So when such statements are available, when we have seen attempts being made by Boeing to subvert investigations, to conceal critical information, keep planes flying even when there's a real risk present, that shows the intention as well. The US Department of Justice has even pushed a fraud investigation and a criminal case against Boeing for these misgivings of the company. So that is what brings me to the question, is there a larger attempt to misdirect the investigation at the preliminary stage itself? Why did AAIB came out with such a report? Why wasn't the context given? If it was a mistake on the part of AAIB, now Western media has run with that narrative. They're adding their own twist to it. So is there a bigger conspiracy to mislead and misdirect the investigation itself? So let me know what you think in the comments. Because as I said, modern aircrafts are very, very complex systems technologically. There are many things which could go wrong, from human error to manufacturing defect to negligence of the operator to various environmental factors. Or it could be a combination of everything. So to unravel this, you need honest, transparent investigation to happen. That is the least the victims deserve and the families of these victims deserve. So let me know, what is your take on this? Is it just Western misreporting, irresponsible reporting by them, or is there a larger conspiracy, which is likely, where Boeing is trying to collude with them to try and disappropriate the blame and push it on the pilots? So with this, I bring my discussion to an end. Thanks for watching, and do hit the subscribe button.